Ladies and gentlemen, now we entering the first session covering the theme Human Capital as a Driver of Economic Growth and the Foundation of Prosperity. This session will talk about the strong relationship between human capital and economic growth, because it is said that knowledgeable and skillful people, as well as investment in health and education, can create productivity and benefit the nations. Chairing this session would be the news anchor of Metro TV, Ibu Kania Sutisnawinata. And now, I would like to invite Ibu Kania to come on stage and start this session. The floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to, before we start this session, of course, I'd like to invite the distinguished panel in this session to please come on stage and join me. First of all, I'd like to invite the Chief Economist of Human Development of the World Bank, Ibu Roberta Gatti, to please come on stage. A big round of applause, please, for Ibu Roberta Gatti, Ambassador of Japan to Indonesia, His Excellency Mr. Ishii Masafumi, Deputy Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, Zhuang, Director of Sustainable Development Goal Studies Center of the Pajajaran University, also former Minister of National Development Planning of Indonesia, Ibu Armida S. Alisjahbana. And also joining us later is the Minister of National Development Planning of Indonesia, Bapak Bambang PS Brodjonegoro. Thank you so much, panelists, to join me on stage. Good morning. And again, good morning to everyone. I'm delighted to be here, especially in Bali, to host the panel on human capital as driver of economic growth and the foundation of prosperity. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us in this first session. In a moment, I will introduce the panel, but let me just give you a short background of what are we going to be discussing about, our topic this morning. As was mentioned during Ibu Ani's speech this morning, the finance minister, the progress in human capital is said to be the real face of development in many countries. It is now true more than ever, as the president of the World Bank also pointed out, that human capital is about 65% of the wealth in high-income countries and only 40% in low-income countries. This is evidence that human capital is a significant factor which has a big influence in driving the economy around the world. And in a rapidly digitalizing world economy, investment in human capital, i.e. education, both in quality and also quantity, and also health, is an issue that must be addressed by countries around the world for the people in their countries to be able to compete in the economy of the future. And to talk more about this, let us now turn to our panel. I'd like to introduce, again, next to my left is the Director of Sustainable Development Goal Studies Center of the Pajajaran University, also former Minister of National Development Planning of Indonesia, Ibu Armida S. Alisjahbana. Welcome, Ibu Armida. Thank you so much for joining us in this panel. And also here with us this morning is Ambassador of Japan to Indonesia, His Excellency Mr. Ishii Masafumi. Welcome, Ambassador. And next to the ambassador is a Chief Economist of Human Development of the World Bank, Ibu Roberta Gatti. Welcome. And also Deputy Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, Zhuang. welcome to Bali. And what I'd like to do first is I'd like to give each of the panelists a 5 to 7, maybe 7 to 10 minutes, perhaps a brief introduction on the topic, just to give a foundation to the discussion later on. We will also open a Q&A with the audience here. And first, I'd like then to give this opportunity to Ibu Armida S. Alisjahbana. For the presentation, can I use? Yes, you can use the podium, and you can just sit in your seat as well. You're free to do whatever you want. 5 to 7 minutes. Brief presentation, and I think Ibu Armida S. Alisjahbana is going to share with us what has been perhaps the experience of Indonesia. We have Bapak Bambang Brodjonegoro joining us on stage. Welcome, Pak Bambang. Pak Bambang is Minister of National Development and Planning of Indonesia. Okay. Ibu Armida.
Right, yeah. Thank you very much, Mbak Kania. Very good morning to all of you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. May I start by giving a very short presentation, maybe 7 to 10 minutes, just to outline the role of human capital as the foundation of Indonesia's long-term economic growth. Mungkin PowerPoint-nya bisa dibantu. Ada PowerPoint presentation, bisa dibantu ya. So the title of this session is How to Link Human Capital with Economic Growth. And I would like just to go through basically my slides, not too many of the slides. First, by sharing with you the simulation we did actually 2-3 years ago that link sources of Indonesia's long-term growth. How to basically we can obtain growth that is quite not medium, but at that time we aim to have long-term growth about 7%. Why 7%? Because this is growth, the economic growth that can sustain our economy, also generating jobs, and increase our welfare. So that's the first. Second, I would like then to link the roles of human capital in achieving this target growth. And third, certainly there are many policy implications in terms of population, in terms of education, in terms of health, and so on and so forth, which basically Ibu Sri Mulyani, in her address this morning, she already outlined everything at the global level as well as for Indonesia. So I'm a bit, well, what should we talk about then, because it's already been outlined by Ibu Sri Mulyani. But for the policy implication, I would like to just touch on a very specific issue, the case of education. Of course, there are colleagues from the Ministry of Education atau juga dari Kemendikbud that can talk more on this, but I just want to draw the specific outline in the case of education. Okay, next slide please. Let me just share with you, this is some simulation, just to give the idea, the role of human capital to increase the so-called long-term economic growth. The simulation shows that to attain, just way of example, to attain, let's say, economic growth that we would like, for example, 7%, 7%, if the capital stock growth is, let's say, 10%, we achieved this long time ago, we managed to achieve this long time ago, 10%, and then labor force growth 1.2%, growth in mean years of schooling, let's say 2.5%, okay. With the growth in total factor productivity meager, just a little, let's say 0.2%, we can achieve 7%. But if the capital stock is only growing 7%, Yeah, now we managed to achieve close to 6%. So let's say this is maybe a more reasonable scenario. Short term to medium term is 7%. Labor force is still growing maybe 1.2%. Mean years of schooling still growing 2.5%. Then we need a higher growth in total factor productivity to achieve that targeted higher growth, yeah, of 7%. So that's the message, yeah. Without that, forget it, yeah. Unless, yeah, we can increase the capital stock growth, maybe like 10%, then maybe we will be able to achieve that higher growth trajectory. So next slide, please. Now I would like to link this scenario or simulation with the roles of human capital. I'm going to read, yeah, just the presentation that I already prepared. So to achieve long-term growth scenario of minimum 7%, combination of growth in capital stock and human capital, or quality-adjusted labor and augmented labor, is warranted, as shown in the previous simulation scenario as follows. First, growth of capital stock at least in the middle range, 7% in the short to medium term, 1 to 5 years time, has to increase, yeah, to 10% over the medium to long term after 5 years time. Second, population growth has to be able to achieve the net reproduction rate of 1 by 2022 or 2023, and a total fertility rate of 1.1 by 2025. These numbers I took from the latest Indonesia population projection, yeah, 2010, 2035. Those are the assumptions. So we have to be able to achieve that assumptions, yeah, by the designated time. At the latest, to concur with the projected number of population and benefits from the demographic bonus of productive population structure. Third, to be able to consistently increase the mean years of schooling over the long term by achieving so-called universal education 12 years, yeah, at that time starting in 2020. I think this is a bit too optimistic, yeah, if we look at the data as of now. Fourth, this has to be complemented with curriculum and all yeah, the necessary conditions that prepare skilled labor force relevant to the emerging sources of economic growth, namely not only manufacturing, services, now e-economy, creative economy, including tourism. This is the case of Indonesia. Fifth, it is important that education sector prepares graduates that are behavioral aspect, yeah, like discipline, hardworking, creative, innovative, that are suitable to the emerging trend in the new economy. And six, a more productive economy and production process, which is reflected in higher growth in total factor productivity, of course, has to be also supported, yeah, by other basic prerequisites, such as healthy labor force, good governance, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we know this. Now, my last slides is on the specific policy implication. There are many, of course. Again, population, labor, education, and social security system, and so on and so forth, basically already outlined, yeah, by Ibu Sri Mulyani this morning. But I would like to reiterate just for one sector, which is education. For education, I would like to propose, yeah, or what I see as important is the so-called 4 pillars. First is equitable and quality universal secondary education, assuming doesn't mean, yeah, that primary education is not important, but we assume primary education is already universal, already the quality already achieved. So the next target is we have to achieve, yeah, universal secondary education, including up to senior secondary education, equity, and quality. Without that, very difficult, yeah, to boost the economy, to how to also integrate, yeah, into this new e-economy and so on and so forth, yeah, because our labor force, 60% only apa namanya, pendidikan tertinggi is junior secondary education. So yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, so we have to increase the average years of schooling. Second, integration of industry, not only manufacturing, including service industry with the vocational education. I understand that the government has already reform this vocational education, the SMK, polytechnic education, and also to better suit with the emerging demand side of the economy, to link it better. And then third, higher education as source of technology acquisition and innovation. Jangan lupa not only basic education, secondary education, but still also please pay attention higher education, because without this, we will not be able to catch up in our innovation drive. In this case, what we need to see more is in the specific higher education, innovation, which area that we would like to develop more, whether which manufacturing sector, which industry sector, and so on. So it has to be spelled out. Otherwise, just broad-based, going nowhere. And lastly, I also shared, Ibu Sri Buldiani's also mentioned this, continuous lifelong learning and education of the general population. Including, because if I'm not mistaken, 2022, Indonesian population enters the aging population. So don't wait until 2022 and so on and so forth, but continue from now on, the continuous lifelong learning and education of the general population, formal and informal education. So with that, Mbak Kania, I would like to end my presentation. I have other slides pertaining to health, population, labor, but I think there are the next sessions that will talk more about those issues. I would like to stop now. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Ibu Armida. Right on time, 10 minutes. So next to speak, I'd like to invite the Minister of National Development Planning of Indonesia, Bapak Bambang Brodjonegoro. He will perhaps share with us the experience of Indonesia in staying competitive by investing in its people. Please welcome. We have about 10, maximum 10 minutes, Minister.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Very good morning to all of you. So let me try to complement what Bu Armida just presented by focusing on what government is going to do in the last 2 years of this government, 2018 and 2019, related to the human capital. Certainly, when we are talking about human capital, we are talking about the development. Whatever the states of development, human capital, I think, will be the key factor to promote the advancement in the development. And I think everybody knows that we are experiencing demographic bonus, and it's just, demographic bonus is just about the number of population. But the question is how to capitalize on this demographic bonus. And certainly, we need to focus our development priority on human capital. On the first 3 years of this government, we are focusing more on infrastructure. And I think it's really needed because our infrastructure is lag behind. And we don't have enough competitiveness if we maintain our infrastructure just like the existing condition. So we need to upgrade the infrastructure. But on the last 2 years of this government, we are trying to shift. I mean, infrastructure is still important, but there will be higher priority on the human capital. And we can see the challenges are still, imminent. High total, for example, the high total fertility rates against below replacement rate. So it means that in terms of reducing total fertility rate, Indonesia is still lag behind. I mean, our TFR now is 2.3. And then we still have the basic issue related to health, high mother and infant mortality rates, as well as low coverage of social security program, uneven and disparity in quality of education. I think Bu Armida just mentioned about that. And of course, the population distribution itself. So as a result, we still have the issues of poverty. We still have 10.12% poverty of our population. Inequality, Gini ratio, the latest, 0.391. Youth unemployment, I mean, unemployment in general, currently around 5.5% or equal to 7 million labor force. And still we are concerned about the youth unemployment, as well as low human development index. Our human development index is not yet categorized as high human development index and still ranked relatively low compared to other countries in the world. So the question, how to utilize the demographic bonus, relies on productivity of labor market. So if you want to have higher productivity on labor market, we have to make sure all these basic health, education will be provided for all potential labor force. If we have higher productivity labor market, then hopefully we can escape from middle income trap, as well as sustaining the economic growth. So if I move to, let's say, page 5, 5, please, yeah. If you look empirically, 1970-2010, so 40 years period, there is a positive correlation between human capital, especially education and economic growth. So there is no question. We need to make sure the quality of human capital, including education, is at the top priority. Because once it is improving, then economic growth will be higher. And we don't have to look around the world. Just look at one example in the Far Eastern Asia, South Korea, in which they graduate very quickly from low-income countries to middle-income countries and to high-income countries. Previously, Far East Asia also has another good experience, which is Japan. The ambassador is here. So those two countries, I think, should be our reference when we are talking about the importance of human capital in our economy. And then, what kind of investment of human capital that will yield the higher return? Well, if we look, I mean, if we categorize, sebelumnya, halaman 5. If we categorize based on the age, it's clear. The highest investment should be targeted toward the earliest years. Meaning that if you put your investment too much, let's say on the middle age, higher education or high school or on the job training, then it will be a little bit too late. And the yield, there will be positive yield, but it will be smaller. Compare if you invest on the earliest year. Why earliest year? You can imagine if we don't pay too much attention on the earliest year, we will have a lot of stunting on the children. Once the children suffer of the stunting, they cannot, have good achievement in their education. They will be lag behind in their education. And of course, they will have problem to find the jobs or to compete in the job market. And as a result, there will be even higher poverty due to the stunting. And that's what happens if we ignore the importance of earliest years of our life. So the earliest could be the first 1,000 days. 1,000 days, quite, I think, equivalent to almost 3 years, or the first 5 years. So that's how we should allocate our resources, especially budget. For the earliest years, how to reduce the stunting, how to reduce infant mortality rate, and how to reduce maternal mortality rate. I think that kind of investment or budget allocation that we need to do. And then, of course, after that, we need to upgrade our education system, preschool as well as school period. And when they are ready to be in the job market, we need to upgrade the job training mechanism in Indonesia. So if we look at human capital endowment, some of the indicators I already mentioned. So our GDP per capita by 2016, 3,605. Infant mortality rate still at 24. Years of education, not bad actually, 12.7 years. Total fertility rate, as I mentioned, still 2.3. And the most important thing, the number of potential millennial generation, 90 million in 2018. Why it's important? Because they are our future, and they are actually the target of our human capital. So every effort through education, through health, through vocational upgrading the training, and also entrepreneurship has to be channeled to this group because they are the future. They will be the next income, middle income class in Indonesia. But again, 90 million, of course, is not a small number. Not many countries have population close to 90 million, and this is just the millennials in Indonesia. And of course, the challenge would be, according to the World Economic Forum 2017 Global Human Capital Index, our ranking is only ranked 65, while other ASEAN, Malaysia 33rd, Thailand 40, and Vietnam 64th. So we are behind those three countries. And why we are behind them? Of course, the problem, if you look at the breakdown of the index, it will be on the deployment issue related to the jobs, know-how related to the skill, especially the high skill, and the better thing is only on the capacity related to the education especially, and also on the development. So, but what I mean by slightly okay, because we are still ranked number 53 and 64. It's still bad actually. So it means in all aspects of human capital, we need to do improvement in order to catch up with our neighbors, especially in Southeast Asia. And then if I jump to the page 11. In page 11, of course, when you are talking education, I think Ibu Armida already mentioned quite in detail, one important element is the teachers. There will be no quality in education if we don't have qualified teachers. In Indonesia, still, there are teachers who have non-degree qualification, especially on the eastern part of Indonesia. And then at higher education level, they're still under qualification lecturer. I mean, if you are teaching the bachelor program, you need to have at least master degree in order to be a good teacher, good lecturer for the bachelor degree. But we still have, I think, around 19% of the Indonesian lecturers with bachelor degree. Of course, this has to be differentiated. We are talking about academic or general education. If we are talking about vocational education, then certainly the expertise, experience will have higher value than just simply a bachelor degree. But still, in general, Indonesia behind Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand for that kind of quality of education, including publication number, if I jump a little bit on the higher education. Because in terms of publication, I think you can see we are actually at the bottom. That's why you cannot see the line of Indonesia, because it's very bottom. The rest, actually, like Singapore, Malaysia, is way above Indonesia. And then let me move, after talking about education and health a little bit, let me move to now the issue of the labor force. So let me go through. Okay, page 18. Okay, I jump a little bit because Kania only gave me 10 minutes. Let's say, after we take care the issue of basic education, basic health, we can improve the quality of education as well as our health, then we face the real challenge. The real challenge is whether our labor quality will match the demand from the labor market. And this is the reality that you cannot avoid. And government cannot intervene too much. It means that we have to prepare our labor force before they are ready to compete in the labor market. And unfortunately, at one side, we still have unemployment, 5.5%, equivalent to 7 million labor force. But many employers struggle to find employees with the right skills. So clearly, this is a mismatch. At one point, unemployment. At the other side, they have difficulty to find the right employees. So something has to be done because mismatch is there. And then we can also see that the need of skilled workers for the Indonesian economy will go higher. In 2015, the needs only 38%. 2045, 30 years later, it will be 90%. Why 90%? Because our economy is developing, our economy is advancing. Our economy in the future will need more and more skilled labor. And that's also supported by the fact that there is a high labor movement in service sector. 43% in 1997 of the labor in service sector, 2017 already 56%. So basically it's dominating. This increase in service sector happened at the same time when the agriculture sector declining in terms of the labor participation, while manufacturing relatively stagnant. And why there is a high movement to service sector? Our service sector now becomes more and more modern. I mean, it's not just traditional service sector, it is more modernized service sector. As a result, they need more laborers, they can give maybe a better wage. At the other side, the agriculture sector has declined in terms of the number of youths working in agriculture sector. The young Indonesians prefer not to continue their parents' activity in agriculture. They prefer to move to the urban area, to the modern sector. And some of them go to the manufacturing, some others go to the service sector. As a result, our urbanization right now is 52%. So more than half of Indonesian population already urbanized, already live in urban area. And of course, they cannot work as farmers if they live in urban area. They need to go either service or manufacturing. Since the manufacturing growth is relatively also stagnant, I mean not so much growth, then they turn to the service sector. And since the service sector itself in the future will be more and more modernized with the digital economy, Industrial Revolution 4.0, then certainly for the future, actually we have to prepare from now, Indonesia will need to have more middle and high-skilled workers. In order to do that, we need to improve the strategy for improving our skilled workers. First, enhancing the training curricula for especially the vocational. I think the reason why government pay attention to the vocational simply because we need more medium to high level skill of laborers, and that has to be done through the vocational. Cannot be done too much through the general education. So aside from improving the curriculum, because sometimes the curriculum is rather rigid. Rigid means they still follow the old curriculum, and whenever we have discussion about revising curriculum, there is some kind of resistance from the education sector to revise the curriculum, while curriculum has to adapt to the technology advancement. And then we need to promote competency-based vocational training and apprenticeship program or internship. What happened in our vocational system is quite tragic because quite significant graduates from vocational school didn't get the jobs. They are unemployed, while theoretically they should it should be easy for them to find the jobs. And the reason because, aside from the, less adaptive curriculum, the other problem is they don't have experience working with the companies. Not only the students, the teacher as well. So the teachers keep teaching the old paradigm, the old technology, while the employers already utilize the new technology. So whenever the graduates, apply to the companies and they do the selection, then the students cannot use the newest technology because the teacher never teach that subject, and the equipment in the workshop, in the training facility, in the school, also is not the latest one. So this is the biggest issue that we need to solve. And one quick solution is to promote apprenticeship or internship program. So let the students and the teachers be aware of the latest technology and having direct experience working in the companies. Last but not least is to improve qualification, requirement, and certification. I think we need to create the new paradigm. If you are in a vocational school, it's not the diploma that you are looking for. It is the certificate that you should look for. And then the employer, rather than evaluating your diploma, your GPA, things like that, it's better for them to evaluate their certificates. What kind of skill level they already pass, and it will be written in that certificate. Also, if you base on certificate, that it will be easier to find a job, rather than, showing your diploma everywhere. Because diploma is just a GPA. And then whether this diploma really reflects your skill is highly questionable. So it has to be on certification. And we need to have national certification system to make sure the employer also will give some kind of appreciation to somebody who has the certificate, as well as guarantee the certain wage. In many cases, if the employers do not respect the certificates, they sometimes give the wage not based on the certificate, but based on the diploma. So somehow, a person with a high skill, because he or she only has certificate, will be paid less, simply because the diploma is not up to the level, or maybe the GPA is not as good as the other competitors. So there are a lot of things to be done. Aside from the vocational training, social security, and we have started that. But the issue, of course, the coverage of the social security itself. We already have universal coverage for health, as well as for the pension. And we have 5 programs here: accident, old age saving, pension program, as well as death insurance. Then the issue, last but not least, is the universal coverage. I think Pak Fahmi is here. Last time we only budgeted what, 92 or 94? Yeah, 94 million, yeah? 94 million recipients, while our estimation should be 107, right? 107 millions. So we need to fulfill this. I mean, the 107 million people should be eligible to get the government support in health insurance through the Universal Health Coverage System, or BPJS Kesehatan. While for the pension fund, still the people who registered for the National Pension Fund System still relatively low. Of course, there's still time, maybe up to 2019, but again, it's only 1 year left. So on conclusion, it's clear that human capital investment needs to be implemented more integrated and holistic in order to create higher quality of labor force. So again, we need to focus on this 90 million of millennial generation in the next 5 years as an asset of innovation and boosting economic growth. Again, if we are talking about most of startups do not come from our age. Most of startups will come from our millennial, and that's why they need to be the focus in order to create more entrepreneurs, more startups, and of course, a better life for them. And then fostering sources of investment to create better and good job opportunities by improving investment climate and labor regulation, I think is quite clear. And then ensuring universal coverage of national social security to stimulate higher productivity, both for the pension fund and for the health. A couple of weeks ago, here also in Bali, I happened to be one of the speakers of the international conference on the social security system, especially for the pension fund. And it's clear our pension fund, national pension fund system, although it has been integrated into one big national pension fund, BPJS Ketenagakerjaan, their asset under management, their current asset under management, only 300 trillion rupiah. Looks big, but only 10% compared to asset under management in Malaysia, in Malaysian national pension system. And then don't forget, Malaysia only has, I don't know, 20-something or 30 million population. Indonesia is 260 million. So we are 10 times. We are 10 times in terms of population, but asset under management in pension fund only 1/10 compared to Malaysia. So this has to be improved. And if we have been able to accumulate the pension fund, that could be the source of long-term investment, including for infrastructure. And that has happened in most European countries, in the North American countries, as well as in the Far Eastern part of Asia. So there are a lot of potentials, but at the same time, there are a lot of challenges in developing human capital in Indonesia. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Om.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Bambang. As was mentioned by Pak Bambang, Japan should be a reference in developing human capital. And next to speak, we have the ambassador of Japan here with us, Mr. Ishii Masafumi. Mr. Ambassador, if you'd like to give a perhaps brief introduction on what was the experience of Japan and what we can learn from it.
Can I do it from here?
Sure, sure.
Just a change of direction. And I don't want to waste time because I love Bali, but being stuck in the room without window may not be the best thing to do in Bali. So I just want to make my speech very short. You know, among the panelists, I'm the only guy without any economist background. So I'll try to come up with the practical tips rather than talking about economic assessment or theory. And I want to deal also with the human capital issue from the perspective of capacity building, tech transfer, vocational training. And then I want to deal with two issues. One is I just want to share with you the experience of Japan, as was directed by Kania. And number two, I'd like to identify challenges for Indonesia and what Japan can do to help. So right on to the first phase, that is the experience of Japan. You know, we became number 2 GDP of the world about 20 years after the end of the Second World War and stayed in that position for 40 years. Why did it become possible? You know, we are like Bali. Not much in the sense that we are a country of love, but a country without any resources other than human resources. And I think the human capital was a key for our huge economic development. But there are a few elements you need to bear in mind. First, high-level average education. You know, even during the 18th century, I think literacy rate in Japan was 50%. And right after the end of the Second World War, literacy rate was 98%, as high as 98%. You know, Indonesia is now more than 95%, so you are high enough already. And number two is, I think our industry, Japanese private industry, had every incentive for investing their money for vocational training because of the long-standing traditional labor practice in Japan. That is, lifelong employment system supported by the seniority system. The longer you stay, you have more pay. So, you know, the company can expect the guy to stay in the same company for life. So you have every incentive to invest money on them for education, vocational training. So after a few years, they become a real working force. That's number two. Number three was the close coordination among government, industry, and academia. You know, as early as 1961, we created an institute called the Research Development Corporation of Japan. That is the institution to give a seed money to connect industry and academia so that they can come up with some sort of spin-off products. And you know, the things like a blue LED is a product of this process. I think this institution invested only $5 million US, and additional value of the development of blue LED was $3 billion US. So that's how it works. So it was all fine up to about 10 years ago. Now we have a problem. Number one, aging is going on. The number of the workforce itself had started declining as early as 1997. So, you know, at this time, the dependent population index, you know the dependency population index, that is the sort of out-of-work population divided by working population. In Japan, now it's 64.5, which means 3 working population support 2 out-of-work population. Indonesia, the number is 49, which means 2 working populations support 1 out-of-work population. So, you know, this situation is already really serious in Japan. Second problem, I think the collapse of the traditional labor practice. There's no longer lifelong employment. People do change their jobs. So there's less and less incentive on the part of private industry to invest their money. And number 3, I think the coordination between industry and academia has never been good enough in Japan, simply because industry did all the job. Now industry has less incentive. Academia is now struggling how to connect themselves with industries for the sake of creating a spin-off industries. So in order to cope with these kind of situations, we are now, number 1, trying to change labor practice. We are now trying to involve female laborers more and more than ever. And we are trying to make use of the robotics. You know, in most of the countries, introducing robotics means pros and cons. Of course, higher productivity, but perhaps higher unemployment rate. In Japan, higher unemployment rate caused by the robotics is not an issue of concern, because our labor force, number of labor force is in decline. So introducing robotics is all positive in Japan. And we are now revitalizing the role of the academia as an institution for creating state-of-the-art technologies, creating spin-off startup industries. That's where we are. So now I'm moving on to the second part, that is to identify the challenges for Indonesia and to see what Japan can do to help. I think as a start, you should be confident. You are much better situation than Japan is at this time. Your average age, 30 years, average age, 47 years old. You are still young, your population is growing, that means the huge number of input of new laborers. And in addition to that, you have human capital is not the only resource you have natural resources as well. So be confident, you can do it with the leadership of Minister Bambang, I think. But in order to make sure that these capacities is utilized, I think there are at least 3 policy objectives you need to bear in mind. First, as Minister Bambang mentioned, you need to come up with institutions that produce middle-skilled workforce. In other words, you know, in Indonesia, people going to university is a little bit less than 25%, while in Japan, it's like 63%. Indonesia, 25% is number 100 in the world. Japan is actually not that high, number 40 in the world. But all in all, you simply cannot expand the number of universities at once. So you need to come up with some sort of institutions below university level, which is good enough. From that viewpoint, we have an interesting system in Japan, which is called, in Japanese, kosen. Kosen. Among some of the Indonesian experts, this has already become Indonesia, Bahasa Indonesia, but kosen is like a college of technology. Point is, kosen education start from as early as the age of 15, right after the junior high school in Japan. And education lasts for 5 years. And it's all vocational training. So by the time you graduate, you are still 20, younger than university graduate. But you are 5-year full sort of vocational training with you. And then you are ready to move into the industry. You may not be the top class engineer, but you can be as good as middle skilled force. And I think we have actually done a test case when we cooperated in the establishment of what we call the Electronic Engineering Polytechnic Institute of Surabaya. That was established in 1988 with the Japanese government cooperation. And since then, 28 years, they have created more than 11,000 graduates, 400 every year. And some of them created a company that is doing a maintenance for Garuda Airlines. So I think the level of this polytechnic is really, really high. So you need to come up with many, many of these. Not as high as university, but the really concentrated vocational training institution. Now, second policy challenge or objective is to, of course, make your university even more, high-end. Of course, university is very, very important when it comes to particularly the creating spin-off industries. And you have already got a very good universities, Gajah Mada, Indonesia, Bandung Industrial Universities, and I think you are doing a lot of spin-off already. And we have been supporting universities like Gajah Mada for expanding their capacity for vocational training to 8,000 at this time. Now, third, last but not least, I think you need to bring private companies on board for the vocational training. Let them play their own role. For that, you need to create a certain kind of incentive. Without incentive, I think so far, Japanese, there are about 1,800 Japanese companies working in Indonesia. They have created almost 5 million jobs, and 95% of that job are for Indonesians. When we are constructing a subway system, MRT, in Jakarta, there are only about half dozen of Japanese. Everybody else are Indonesians. They are learning technology, they are learning techniques from a very few number of Japanese. So this is how we do business. Some examples of the specific companies, take the example of Toyota, right? Toyota, I think they have created a training center in 2012, sorry. And capacity of that training center is 5,300 every year, and it's always full. And they have even created a little bit higher vocational training institution specialized for molding with the cooperation of the molding associations of Indonesia. And I think they are producing about 64 very high-skilled labor, and their target is to create about 1,000 skilled, very high-end skilled labor by the year 2025. Panasonic is also playing their role. I think they have, I think, created already so far 3,000 skilled labor graduated from their training center, and they are trying to expand it even further. And, you know, many Indonesian people are also doing on-the-job training abroad, and Japan is playing our own role. In the past 10 years, 67,000 Indonesians did on-the-job training in Japan. They came back. I think most of them got a very good job. So these are the things Japan has been doing to help Indonesia in terms of vocational training, capacity building, tech transfer. But in order to make sure that those private industries have enough incentive to carry on their training efforts, I think it would be better if Indonesian government comes up with some sort of incentive. Maybe it's taxation, you know, some favorable treatment in terms of the import of some goods. I think that will, these kind of small incentives will make sure that those private companies have even more efforts to invest their resources for the vocational training for Indonesian workers. That will create, that will make even sure, more certain that the future economic development of Indonesia will be sky high. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We'll get back to Pak Bambang to give a response to those, but we have to go to Mrs. Roberta Gatti, who is also here with us. She's the Chief Economist of Human Development of the World Bank, and I think she's the expert who is going to take us through why human capital matters. Please welcome.
To follow the excellent introduction by Minister Sri Mulyani and the excellent interventions that we had so far. I brought a few slides and I wanted to use them to unpack a little bit what it means that human capital matters. So if we can load the slides. There they are. So human capital matters, and let's start from the very beginning of what is human capital. The Nobel laureate, and this is in the next slide, Gary Becker, in his Nobel lecture, called it the additions to education, training, medical care that we give to each other as individuals. It turns out that this idea of these additions to humans as a capital is very old in economics, and it dates back all the way to Adam Smith in the Wealth of Nations publication in the 1776, I believe. And the idea is that these additions that we give to ourselves are productive. They take time, they take money. Think about fees for education, think about the time it takes to go to school, but they are productive and they generate a return. Now, they generate returns in many ways. And in the next slide, you will see that they generate returns to individuals. And investing in human capital is not that different from investing in physical capitals. We put in money and time, and we'll get out money. That for individuals means higher earnings, higher wages. All of this adds up to important gains for economies. And we'll talk in a minute about what it means for growth. But it also turns out to have high benefits for societies. And there is a lot of evidence that shows that increasingly, if we increase education in economies, political participation improves, people are more likely to show up for voting, crime decreases, and there are overall fewer risky behaviors. So let me give you some examples of what it means that human capital matters. And this is what some examples that have to do with what happens to people, to individuals. The minister before and also Minister Srimulyani already hinted at the importance of investing in the early years. I just wanted to bring the example, the evidence that was brought forth by Jim Heckman, who was already cited before, the Nobel Prize winner, who devoted the last 20 years of his life to showing the returns to investing in the early years. So in this program, which was implemented in North Carolina, which is a state of the United States in the early 70s, a group of children was randomized, was chosen at random to be assigned to a program. And the program was a combination of social workers who were working with the parents to help them with their parenting practices, and also teachers who work directly with the children to provide this cognition and stimulation that is necessary for a child to thrive. And these children were children from disadvantaged families. So what happens is that 40 years later, Jim Heckman and his authors went back and measured what happened to the wages of these children. And it turned out that if you put it all together, not only the wages, but also the fact that the children who were treated in this program were less likely to be in jail, the girls were less likely to have undergone teen pregnancy, it turned out that if you compute the economic return, this amounted to 13% a year. Now, no bank now will give you 13% a year if you invest your money. Definitely, I would want to invest my pension in these programs. And so this is one of the many examples along the lines of the Jamaica example that was cited earlier that show how important and how profitable it is to invest in early years. I wanted to bring, and this is, you find it in the next slide, also some examples that are specific to Indonesia. This is an impact evaluation that was computed on the Early Childhood Education and Development Project. This was a project that reached out to 3,000 villages in 50 districts, and it was a collaboration between the World Bank and the government of Indonesia. The project had three key components. One, to raise awareness. The second one, to provide block grants to communities to invest in elements of stimulation for the early years and teacher trainings. So it turned out that a large number of teachers were trained. More than 600,000 children had access to some form of cognitive stimulation, and 6,000 playgrounds were established. The important outcome of all of this is that when a rigorous impact evaluation was done, which means that children who had exposure to this program were compared with children who did not have exposure to this program, what was found is that the children who had the opportunity to be exposed to the program had increased maturity, had a broader vocabulary, and overall showed a deeper cognitive development, all of which is associated with school readiness. So it matters internationally, and we have also proofs within Indonesia. For one last example for how much human capital matters for people, and I know I don't have to convince you, but it's nice to see the numbers, I wanted to bring the examples of the incredible expansion of schooling access that Indonesia did in the 1970s. Indonesia must be congratulated for a tremendous improvement in access, and there's been already reference to the fact that primary education has achieved universality. What I wanted to show is that Indonesia made an important investment that paid off tremendously. So between 1973 and 1979, 61,000 primary schools were built in Indonesia. So that means that numerous cohorts of children had the opportunity to go to school that wouldn't have had otherwise. It turns out that 40 years later, and further on still in the future, the stream of revenues from that investment, which is essentially the earnings of people who had the opportunity to go to school that wouldn't have otherwise had, is 9 times larger than the cost that was sustained to build the schools and train those teachers. 9 times. So investing in human capital really matters. And in the next slide, I try just to summarize how there are many elements to investing in human capital, investing in people's nutrition, investing in health, which has increased life expectancy, increasing access to schooling, but also increasing the coverage and the span of safety nets that can prevent risk, prevent falling into poverty, and help families to cope with risk. All of these really add up to tremendous gains for the economy. And human capital does not operate in isolation. People work with machines, that is physical capital, and they work in an environment of technology. And all of you who have studied macroeconomics will recognize the elements that we have seen in the simulation that was presented in the first intervention on what is the impact of increasing human capital and labor force population on growth. So it turns out, and you will see it in 2 slides, if you can move the slides forward. The next slide as well. Thank you. It turns out that the empirics of human capitals are quite stunning. And recent evidence has shown that up to half of the differences in income between countries, let's say the US and Malawi, Indonesia and Turkey, are accounted for by human capital. Not only the quantity, how many people, how long they live, but also the quality of their education and their learning. Yet, and you'll see it in the next slide, as many before me already hinted, globally there are, I forgot this other piece of evidence. This is actually something that Minister Srimulyani has alluded to in her opening. And this is another indication of how much human capital matters and how much it has mattered historically for countries that have become rich. And what you see here are estimates taken from a recent World Bank publication that has just come out a couple of years ago. It's called The Changing Wealth of Nations. And what this publication does is that it estimates different sources of wealth for countries. Not only physical capital, infrastructure and machines, natural capital, and the governor of Bali was referring to the natural capital of Bali, which is more geographical rather than oil, and human capital. And human capital here is estimated as the present value of all the earnings of the population. And what this graph shows is that in high-income countries, human capital is worth about 2/3 of the total wealth of these economies. So these are the economies that have become rich are the ones that have their wealth invested in people. Now, all of this points at tremendous gains from human capital. But as I was saying, the challenge continues. And in the next 2 slides, you will see a summary. Actually, you will see one specific number that I would like you to remember, and that Srimulyani referred to before. 155 million children in the world under 5 years of age are stunted. That means that they are short for their age. But there's more to that than just height. Stunting is an indicator that these children are unlikely to reach their full potential as individuals. And we know that stunting is a complicated matter. It's not just about nutrition, and you'll see it in the next slide, but it's also about the lack of access to sanitation. It is also about families that are not attuned to the proper caregiving, including not providing exclusive breastfeeding to children in the first 6 months of their life. There are many more challenges, and next slide, please. And one of them is that learning is really trailing behind. And this is what the World Development Report on Education of the World Bank has called a learning crisis. This is evidence from India, and in this survey, 3/4 of 3rd graders were unable to complete this simple subtraction. And when you look at 5th graders, half of children in 5th grade were still unable to complete this simple operation. And the challenges don't stop there. Next slide, please. In health, 100 million people a year are still pushed into poverty because of out-of-pocket expenses. And as many countries, including Indonesia, are making strides into universal health coverage, the challenges are still important. So why do these challenges persist? If human capital matters so much, so why are children still not learning? Why are children still dying young? Why are people being pushed into poverty by out-of-pocket health expenditure? The reasons are many. Families and individuals are sometimes unable to invest as much as they should in human capital. Parents cannot borrow against the earnings of their children. Sometimes they lack information about the returns to human capital. Sometimes social norms, particularly for girls, prevent family to make the optimal investments in human capital. And families only look at their own private returns to human capital, earnings and wages. But sometimes they fail to realize that if they train and they send to school their daughters, the children of their daughters will be better off. So sometimes families don't have all the right incentives to invest in human capital, and that's why it's important that governments intervene. But then when governments work, sometimes they fail to do the right thing. Sometimes it's very difficult to pick up these issues politically because they can be very controversial. And sometimes it's just very difficult to deliver with quality. And that's why measurement becomes very important. There is an old saying that says, you manage what you measure. And if it is so difficult for bureaucracy to deliver quality social services, then measurement can really make a change in allowing societies and bureaucracies to understand where they do well and where they could do better. So, and this is my next to last slide. This is why accelerating investment in human capital is now the priority of the World Bank in the quest for eliminating extreme poverty and promoting shared prosperity. The Human Capital Project is the flagship project of our president, which will strongly based on stepping up measurement for benchmarking and also for understanding how to best invest in human capital, moving towards result-based approaches, which has shown to be very promising for this type of investment, mobilizing innovative financing, and really bringing together a partnership with our client countries and international agencies. After all, and you'll see this also in my last slide, building human capital is not only the right thing to do, is really the smart thing to do for economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gatti. And last but not least, we have another economist to speak to us in this session, Deputy Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, Zhuang, who will talk to us about the Asia context and how has the quality of education in Asia improved over the last few years. Yeah. Please welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So let me first thank the Ministry of Finance for inviting ADB to participate in this very important and timely seminar. So human capital, of course, covers many aspects, education, skill development, and health and nutrition. So I would like to focus on one particular issue. This is very important for Asia. This is the quality of education. So let me start by saying that Asia, of course, let me skip that. So Asia has made significant progress in the last several decades in expanding education, in expanding human capital attainments, right? So this chart shows that the average years of schooling for Asia increased from, for instance, 4 years in 1970 to 8 years in 2010. So basically double within 40 years' time. This is a commendable achievement, of course, the average year of schooling compared to with advanced countries, which is about 11 years, still a lot, large gap over there. But the fact that you double the average year of schooling in 40 years' time is commendable. However, the issue is that the education quality, education quality is a major issue for many countries, actually. So this chart shows the test scores of two internationally well-known assessment of cognitive skills of students aged 14 and 15 years. So many countries, many Asian countries participated in these tests, and Indonesia, I think, also participated, and of course, many OECD countries participated. So basically, these are the learning outcomes of the students, and it can be considered as a quality of education, a proxy for quality of education. So here, the test scores are standardized from 0 to 1,000. So minimum is 0 and maximum 1,000. The 400 is a minimum. 400 score is a minimum required for having basic, so-called basic cognitive skills. Basically, that skills is needed for any individual to live and to work effectively in a modern society. 600 level, the score is the minimum level required for, for so-called advanced technical skills. Basically, enable individual to think strategically and solve problems. So these are two critical levels we are looking at. So if you look at this chart, the pink bar shows the percentage of students for each country achieved 400 or above. So basically acquired basic cognitive skills. And we can see, of course, there are very good performance in Asia, for instance, in Singapore and Hong Kong, Japan, including Japan. But on the other hand, there are many poorly performing countries, like Philippines, India. I think Indonesia is also not doing well, so below 50%. So if you look at the gray area is the proportion of students achieving advanced cognitive skills. The share of the students achieved 600 above. And then there, if you look at that, the difference even striking. So of course, there are also good performers in Asia, Singapore again, and Taipei, China, Hong Kong, and Japan, all above 20%. But on the other hand, there are many countries in Asia, the percentage of the students achieve the advanced cognitive skills, the percentage is less than 2%, some countries even less than 1%. So this is the issue of learning crisis, I think the finance minister earlier mentioned, and some of the panelists also mentioned this morning. So now we know that the education is positively correlated with economic growth, as the previous speakers already mentioned. But our research suggests, ADB research suggests that this positive correlation between education and growth is largely driven by quality of education, not just quantity, quality. As you can see from the panel, the chart on the left-hand side, we plotted the GDP growth, average GDP growth, vertical and horizontal, is a test scores we got from these tests. So basically, you can see clearly the controlling for, of course, for year of schooling and also initial per capita income of each country. These are cross-country data. So you can see the positive correlation between GDP growth and test scores, average test scores. On the other hand, we do the same exercise. We look at the vertical is GDP growth, horizontal is the average year of schooling, and we also control for per capita income, initial per capita income, and also test scores. So we found not a strong correlation between growth and the average year of schooling. So basically, this result suggests that the positive correlation between growth and education is really driven by quality of education, not the quantity only. So now the question is how to improve education quality, how to improve the learning outcomes of students. Of course, this is a big issue, and many questions can be asked. For instance, how to allocate public funding across the different types of education, early childhood education, primary, secondary, tertiary, and general education, and TVET, and vocational training, and also how the schools should be monitored, managed, and how parents should get involved in education, and how the curriculum should be designed to reflect students' ability as well as market needs. So these are all important issues. I think we need to look into that. And so what I want to talk about is some analysis, the findings from ADB studies, analysis. We put together 200 indicators of education inputs at various levels, and we compared data for 67 countries. 67 countries participated in this two international assessments. I should mention this PISA test and TIMSS test. So I think we all know, well known. And what we found is that, so we grouped this, the 200 indicators into these categories. So let me, so the categories are the information and data collection, the system of information and data collection, curriculum design, early childhood education, gender equity in enrollment, teacher certification, wages, incentives, public-private partnerships, technology and software usage, public education spending as a percent of GDP, and finally financial assistance. So these are the categories. What we found is that information and data collection system has the largest impact on test scores of the students. So information and data collection. But what this measure is basically a measure of how schools perform, how the performance is monitored and managed. So here we're talking about performance of schools, of students, of parents, as well as the government agencies. So how the performance is monitored and managed. So basically that's the indicator to capture. And we found the curriculum design is also important, especially whether the curriculum has remedial, for instance, programs or enhancement programs to cater for different student ability, as well as how reflect the market, labor market needs. And early childhood and education is also very important. So these three indicators, aggregate indicators, has a very positive and statistically significant impact on test scores. But other indicators, as mentioned, I shown here, also have positive impacts, but is not statistically significant. So that is very interesting results. And because of time constraints, let me just show how early childhood education lead to better learning outcomes at a later stage. Because our data, we have students participate in the tests, but we also have information on students that early childhood education. For instance, when they start, which year they start the schools, 7 and 7, or 6 or 5 or 4. So what we find is that compared to students, start school at 7, compared with that group, if you start 1 year earlier at 6, you can increase your test score, science by 10 points, mathematics by almost 9 points, and reading by, mathematics 10 points, and reading by 9 points. If you start even 1 year, even at the 5 year old, but 1 year, even, an additional year earlier, then you have additional benefits. And So at 4 and to start at 4 or earlier, even higher. So basically, this result suggests that early childhood education is really important. When you had early childhood education, the impact is on later stage. Yeah, these results are when you reach 13 or 14 or 15 years, you participate in tests. So their test results are found to correlate with whether they start education at 7 or 6 or 5, basically. That's the results show. So finally, let me just skip these slides. I just conclude. Basically, what I want to say is, so Asia has made significant progress in expanding education, especially in school enrollments. But quantity of education alone is not sufficient. There's a great need in Asia to improve education quality for sustained economic growth. So central to improve education quality, according to our analysis, is that we need to have a system to monitor and manage performance. And we need to have attention to curriculum design, and we need to have investing in early childhood education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very well. We are going now into our discussion session where we are going also to invite participation from the audience. You can use the Slido to submit your questions to the panelists that are here. As was cited by our panelists throughout this session, it is clear that we have seen various evidences that points that human capital is key to economic growth, but there are some problems that are being faced by the government nowadays, and we are still looking for the right approach and the right policies to implement on how to capitalize or utilize the capacity that are at hand, that are actually available to perhaps Indonesia is one of the examples that we can talk about further. I'd like to get a response from Bambang about what the ambassador mentioned earlier about the collaboration between government and business and educational institutions, and how to engage more private participation in investing in human capital, especially vocational training, including for the role of the government on giving incentive for companies to invest in their workforce. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. In our current response to improve the vocational education, we identify one critical element is the lack of the private sector participation, especially as I mentioned in my presentation about the internship program. So now we are trying to promote the Indonesian corporates to involve in this internship program. Certainly for the companies, if they are involved in the internship program, it is for their benefit. Because as you can imagine, if they have to hire employee directly from the, let's say, vocational school or vocational training institution, they face the risk that the quality of the employee will not match with their needs. As a result, they need to do the retraining. And retraining cost for company is not a small one. Sometimes they feel it is their burden. So they prefer to get the employees that match with their needs. So the way to match the needs is by involved in the internship program. Currently, we already started with the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. Several companies already participated. And the way we do the internship program, actually we start not necessarily with the students. We start with the teachers, because we realize that in terms of the quality of teachers in the vocational education or vocational training institution, they are way behind the market demand. So we start by designing the system in which the teachers have to do an internship from time to time or periodically. So let's say they spend a year in the class teaching, but the next 6 months or the next 3 months, they have to do the internship in the companies and then going back to the school. So we hope by doing this regularly, the teachers will be updated with the latest technology and the market demand. And then for the students, they agree to involve more students in the internship program, in which the private sector or the companies will provide a dedicated tutor. This dedicated tutor or instructors will supervise directly all this internship. So they will make sure the students will really get the benefit of being involved in the internship program, and more importantly for the companies. Once the student finish the internship programs, they are ready to be recruited by the company because the students or the potential employee already knows the expectation of the company and they know how to work with the company culture. So I think this is the kind of the quick win program that we are working on, and we expect more and more private sector to be involved. And basically, we follow what not only Japan has been doing, but certainly some European countries, I think, gave a good example for us. The other thing about private sector involvement in vocational, I think we need to invite more investors in vocational, in the private vocational school or private vocational training institution. I think that will be another important private sector contribution to our human capital development through vocational training. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to Ibu Armida. In terms of investing in people and also or human capital, we haven't talked a lot about how much is needed, how much funding is needed, and how much are governments willing to spend on human capital, and how long should the investment be done, and when do you anticipate to see real results? Do you have any findings on this? Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Okay, I think I would like to also link your question to the question I saw in the
on the slide,
the audience, right? Yes, just being, yeah, the first question, right? Yeah, so more or less the same, yeah. How to prioritize it, especially with a limited budget, yeah, government. So I think the best way is also to link that to the results from HECMA, the slide that Pak Bambang and also Ibu Sri Mulyani actually referred to, that the earlier investment in education has the highest returns. Yeah. But then in the case of Indonesia, I would like to reiterate again my point that we have to cover until universal senior secondary education. Yeah. So therefore, that's, I believe, the job of the government to ensure that it is attained or achieved, especially in terms of accessibility, in terms of equality, equity, and things like that, and also to ensure the quality of education up to universal senior secondary education. But then in terms of the, how do you say it, the pricing, the tariff, especially for higher education and for, well, as the education goes higher, then there is room for private institutions also to provide the education services for those that have the means, to pay for the educational services. So in terms of the pricing, maybe, including in higher education, including in public higher education, I still see rooms for sort of cross subsidy. Maybe
For those who has the means, then let them pay. I give you an example in China. I asked my colleague in China whether they provide free education. They said, well, yeah, up to basic education, up to secondary education, more or less free in terms that well, people pay, but maybe not too much. But for university higher education, sometimes they have to pay a lot. But then how to cross-subsidy it? Well, better to cross-subsidy it from the demand side. Demand side. By giving the so-called scholarship, yeah, or assistance. Not across the board, everything is, now it's across the board, yeah, everything is maybe not cost recoverable. So therefore, maybe in terms of the pricing, we have not properly look at it or work through it.
Okay. So since we are looking at the Slido, there is one question that the ambassador had a peek. And I think he's very much amused by this question, but I think this is a very important question. It is between the focus, should it be on physical capital or human capital? The question was based on Japan's experience, which one is more important, investing in human capital or investing in infrastructure?
I should say both.
You should say both.
Yeah.
You can't choose one over the other.
It's all interrelated, right? I mean, if you create talented labor, they need job. In order to create new job, you need to create industries, particularly manufacturing industries, export-oriented to be supported by small and medium enterprises.
Is it both simultaneously?
Yeah, for that to prosper, you need to have a good infrastructure. And to create good infrastructure, you need good engineers, talented labor. So I think it's all interrelated. So I think, in a sense, I don't envy Indonesia because you have to do all these parallelly, not prioritize. I mean, you need to do everything parallelly. That is your biggest challenge. But by the way, in order to make sure the proper level of infrastructure is created, statistics tells me that you need every year 65,000 new engineers, high-end. And your university creates only 350,000. So you have 30,000 gap. So you need, you have a room for more talented laborers to play their role.
Very well. Let's go to the next question. It's from Anonymous. How World Bank assists developing countries to compete in digital era, given lack of access to technology, digital infrastructure, and literacy?
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, this question really highlights why we should be talking about accelerating investment in human capital now. Is because the reality is changing so rapidly and the skills that are demanded are changing rapidly, and we will have to work as individuals for a long life, and that's good, but we might be working in very different jobs and in jobs that do not even exist now. Yeah. So the World Bank works on the question of supporting countries in access to technology and digital infrastructure, as it works on many other issues by partnering with countries and other organizations to produce new knowledge, by facilitating the exchange of this knowledge, but also providing directly to country technical assistance and also financing when it's needed. On the knowledge side, let me just highlight two products that we worked on, and this is our flagship knowledge report. It's called the World Development Report, and in 1916 it was the Digital Dividend Report, and it was really focused on how not only the digital society is changing, but how this is changing how governments work, the access that citizens have, and the increased agency that citizens have in demanding better services from the government, but also, and this will be the focus on the World Development Report 2019, how the world of work is changing and what are the skills that are needed. And again, we get back to the fundamental point of investing in skills. There's something that should be highlighted here, is that it's not only for us to be ready and competitive, but also for societies to be ready to stave off potential inequality that stems from this digital society. What we are facing is, well, the economists call it in a sort of fairly complex way, skill bias technological change. But essentially, the technological change that we are seeing today is something that rewards much more significantly high skills than it rewards low skills. And that's the technology bias skill change. And this is why it's important to invest in human capital in a way that everyone has an equal opportunity to access these higher skills. I wanted, if I may, also interject a consideration about spending on human capital. It is true that some societies, some countries spend just too little on health and education, and that's just a matter of fact. But it's equally important not only how much you spend, but what you spend it for. So if you spend it for what is a global public good for the country, and also that you spend the money well, and that's the question of efficiency. And Minister Srimulyani referred to this already earlier when she was talking about Indonesia spending on education specifically. And it's important that incentives are aligned, and that's the story of how even once you spend what you need to spend, even when the political will is there, is that these are just very, very difficult machineries to get to work, to deliver the quality that is needed to support the learning that we saw is one of the fundamental drivers of growth. So not only how much you spend, but what you spend it for, how well you spend it, and when you get the whole system with incentives aligned towards quality.
Mr. Zhuang, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think in terms of what the government should do, obviously one is more funding, so public spending on education. For Asia as a whole, developing Asia as a whole, the average public spending on education is about 3.7% of GDP. But normal advanced countries, high-income countries, normally 5-6%. So there is a gap out there. But spending is not alone is not sufficient. Basically, what we are studying, I present to show is that this is particularly on quality of education, is this management of the education system, the monitoring, evaluation, and the management. So involve all actors, of course students and the schools, of course students, parents,
and the teachers?
Government agents, and the private sector as well. So that is the most important determinant of this test score. This we consider as a proxy for education quality. So basically, more spending, I think that's important because given that gap out there, but it improve the efficiency and the management and the better use of the resources.
But what is your perspective on the fast pace of technological change? What kind of an impact does it have on human capital?
So technology change, of course, they provide opportunities, right? So that is improve productivity and so innovation. So this is the opportunities. On the other hand, they create a challenge. The challenge is basically, as Ambassador mentioned, the job loss. For Japan, it's not an issue, but for many other countries, especially for many Southeast Asian countries, try to follow this labor-intensive manufacturing kind of approach, export-led. It has worked in Korea and in Taipei, China, and on China worked. But the question is whether this model will still work in these other countries, especially Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia to some extent, and Philippines. So I think basically that's the challenge. The question, of course, how to tackle that. But I think the way, of course, the way forward is not to stop the technology progress, right? Technology, as I said, is a driver for growth. But on the other hand, we need to have government responses, for instance, basic education, training, so that the skills, development is very important to respond to this challenge. And of course, there are job losses. That means labor market needs to be more flexible, so that social protection is important. So these are the things I think the broader policy issues we often talked about.
Okay. Let us take another question from the Slido. I think we have a couple of minutes left, before we have to close our session. We have, okay, so let's go for this one. The unemployment may caused by the cultural matter, hard to change, job market closely related to economic growth and education system. How to overcome the cultural one? This is from Galpreet. Who's going to take this question? Perhaps Ibu Armida, Pak Bambang? Should we go to the next question?
Let me try.
You will try, Pak Bambang, yes. The unemployment may caused by the cultural matter, hard to change, job, market close related to economic growth and education. How to overcome the cultural one, hard to change.
Yeah, I think if we look at our labor force structure, one issue, related to the culture, is about the female labor participation rate. For the, the advanced economy standard, the Indonesia female labor participation rate is relatively low, meaning that with that low ratio, we cannot have, I think, strong foundation to push our economy into an advanced economy or developed economy. The current participation rate, I think, around 51%. And I think part of that, the low participation of the female labor is due to the cultural issue. And of course, it means that although this female labor has qualification, their education is, good enough, but they choose to be unemployed. So there are many things to overcome these cultural issues with the focus on the female participation rate. I think number one, that has to be with the treatment, or what they call is, pregnancy leave, something like that. I think the Indonesian pregnancy leave needs to adjust following the international standard. And in fact, if I learn from some countries that have been very successful in increasing their female participation rate, number one, for example, flexibility in terms of the period of leave itself. It doesn't have to be, first, lengthening the period, and secondly, giving some flexibility. Because some female employee, for example, prefer that they can do the leave more after they give the birth rather than before giving the birth. Some others will prefer the other way around. So there have to be some flexibility as well as lengthening. And then more interestingly, maybe not in many countries, but in few countries, they also give the chance for the leave, not just for the mother, but also for the father. So if, let's say, a male worker, the wife having the baby, they can also apply for the leave. Of course, it means that the mother can go to work and the father will take care of the baby at home. So this might be too modernized or too advanced for culture like Indonesia, but the more important things, I think, area around the leave issue is very important. From the educational issue, I don't think there will be a problem, because I believe in higher education, now we have the gender issue, not because the female is less than male, but because male is less than female. So less male participation at higher education than female. So it means from every aspect they are ready, but unfortunately the culture prevent them. And usually the culture is related to the family and of course the needs to taking care of the baby and the children. Thank you.
Let's take another question. This one is yes?
Kasia, may I add a consideration on this? That Minister Brodjonegoro brought up a very important question related to labor force participation and unemployment. And I think this is the consensus, economics can do a lot to change what has been consolidated in some culture as cultural norms. And specifically for women, as the minister was referring to, the burden of raising families is disproportionately falling on women's shoulders. And things like improving the access to childcare and also early childhood education is what people in economics call win-win. It would allow to free up female labor force participation, particularly if it is affordable. And if the quality of these services are high, it could deliver for children the type of growth and knowledge that then we know is so important for their own development. So culture and norms are very important, but economics can change these norms over time dramatically. And so there's hope for many societies to actually move things forward rapidly.
Do we have for another question? No? Just one more? We have a couple on the Slido. There is perhaps one more that we can know? Just one more, okay. Investments in early education will only yield results after years. What can be the alternative solution that can produce immediate outcomes with great impact? Ambassador, perhaps you have a policy option that you can share with us. What has been the experience in Japan? Is there any alternative solution?
We start nursery school as early as the age of 3. Mostly 4, so they have a 3-year experience at least before entering into elementary school, which starts from 7. So I'm sure in order to get basic knowledge, mathematics, for example, the earlier the better. Okay. But I think that, I mean, still, when it comes to the talent capacity you need to become an engineer or to be a talented labor in the industry, I guess you need to start sometime around year 15, because starting from 7 is a little bit too early to talk about all technologies, techniques. So you need to be as old as like 15. Maybe 18, which is a normal age to start university education, is a little bit too late to get used to some tangible technology. So that's why, as I said, Kosen, polytechnic system in Japan, is quite unique. Starting not too early, but starting around the age 15, and graduating around the age 20. Before 2 years before university graduate are released. So I think that is one way to fill the gap which exists in a huge market for the middle sort of talented labor.
Okay. Before we end this session, I'd like to throw in just a really fun question to all the panelists here. I always like to ask this question to everyone. This one is about technology. I'd like to start with Bu Armida. Bu Armida, what are the kind of technology would you like to see in the future that is or has not been invented yet?
Thank you very much. I'm not an expert about technology. I'm not an engineer. And I don't know which technology has been invented or which one has not. But related to Indonesia, considering the younger population of Indonesia, I think, my understanding is one of the most creative. So the asset or the advantage of our younger population is their creativity, their capacity to innovate, creative economy, and so on and so forth. So with the advent of digital economy, I think this is an opportunity, really an opportunity. But what we see until now is that in terms of the economy sources of employment creation and so on, lately, more in terms of logistics, transportation, so on, Gojek dan sebagainya, Traveloka dan sebagainya. So more in the payment system, logistics, but not so much on the production side, except on the creative economy maybe, or tourism. So what I would like to see more is how this technology, the digital economy, Industry 4.0 and so on and so forth, also benefit our younger population, also in their capacity also to produce something. It doesn't have to be manufacturing.
Okay.
So otherwise, what would happen is, well, we are facilitating, we are buying imported products. So that's what I don't want to see, and I hope the technology, that kind of technology, could also benefit our younger generation.
Okay. Pak Bambang, any thoughts?
Since you mentioned that this is fun question, I'm trying to answer also in the fun way. I'm a movie lover, and one thing that always, interesting for me is the Star Trek, in which one technology that maybe anybody would like to see is how can we move from this place, for example, in this room in Bali, suddenly in 5-10 minutes in Jakarta. Basically you just move like that. Well, we thought when the Star Trek was made back in, 1970s or 60s, this technology might not be possible. But what I heard, again, this is just, I think, the idea from Elon Musk. I think he's now creating the so-called Hyperloop. Yep. And what they are trying to do is to make the first Hyperloop between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Currently, if you want to go from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, you need 1.5 hours drive. With Elon Musk Hyperloop, theoretically, of course, this is still in the development, you can move from Dubai to Abu Dhabi only in 3 minutes. So this really looks like what happened in the Star Trek. And since this is already being developed by Elon Musk, and let's say if this is successful, this is a technology that we would like to see. So whenever there is an invitation for me, for example, to come to this seminar, I don't have to ride the 7 a.m. flight, from Jakarta and have to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning. So if the invitation, I think for my session is this session 10:30, I can just go from my house maybe 10 o'clock,
10 o'clock, that's
and then suddenly I'm here, rather than going to the airport, riding the airplane, and then going to this venue. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador?
I want to see the technology that makes everybody live until the age of 150 years old. But seriously, I want to see how Indonesia is going to be developed around the time of a 100-year anniversary of your independence, which is 2045. By then, I'll be 88. Just okay, I think. I'll be around, I hope. But by the way, this year is the 60th anniversary of Japan-Indonesia diplomatic relations. I want to live as long as to see 100-year anniversary, which means I have to be 100-year old. So I think everybody should live longer so that we can see all these technological development. But if we live long, you don't have to move so fast. You can just walk forever. So I think that makes our lifestyle completely different.
Right. Thank you.
I think I would like to see a technology that allows those who are in need of medical care urgently and they live in remote areas, very poor areas, that they can have access to the knowledge and what is needed to make them better. But I also would settle for the Star Trek one. I think it's
You
pretty
would go
great.
for that as well? This as well?
Yeah. What kind of technology? I think it's very difficult to say what kind of technology, we should have. I think the market will determine, the market, as long as technology help to improve productivity and help to improve quality of life, right? So that will be will be there and will be developed. And so, as I said, the technology will, offer enormous opportunities, but also challenges. The challenge is that we have to pay more attention to human capital development, skill development. That is the very important, the most important response to the technology progress, the challenge created.
Very well, thank you very much. I think that wraps up the end of our session. As today's economies become ever more knowledge-based and also technologically driven and also globalized, and because we simply don't know what kind of jobs will be created for tomorrow and what it looks like. So there is a growing recognition, I think, that we have to prepare the next generation with future-ready skills to be able to compete in tomorrow's economy. And deepening conversations like this one, I think it will be important to conduct and also to make sure that the gap closes, because I'd like to end this discussion with a note also from the World Economic Forum's Global Human Capital Index of last year that says that currently the world has developed only 62% of its human capital, or conversely, nations are neglecting or wasting an average of 38% of their talent. So that concludes our session. Thank you again for our panelists in our session. If you can please give a big round of applause for our panelists. Dan saya kembalikan ke Mbak MC.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the conclusion of session 1. For all speakers and moderator for this session, please remain on stage. I request the pleasure of the Inspector General, Ministry of Finance, Ibu Sumiati, to give the sign of appreciation. Please come on stage. Ibu Sumiati, please give the sign of appreciation for Bapak Bambang Brodjonegoro. Oh, yeah. And now to Ibu Armida. And to Ibu Kania Sutisnawinata. To Bapak Masafumi Ishii. To Ibu Roberta Gatti. And then the last one, to Bapak Zhuang. Thank you very much. Would you please remain on stage for the photo session?